My name's Monk Rowe for the Phileas Jazz Archive. I'm very pleased to have bassist John Beal with me today. Welcome, sir.
Thanks, man.
Congratulations on your lengthy career. I assume you know a fellow named John Wasserman.
Where would I know John Wasserman?
Well, because he's a bass player, I think, but he wrote this column on the 50 greatest bass players.
Oh, yeah, Ron. Sure.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
and then he did
No,
some math. I don't know if you've seen this, and I don't know what year this was, but he did some math and he took into account your work with the American Symphony and studio work and Broadway shows, et cetera, et cetera. And he came up with, oh gosh, close to 30,000 gigs for John Beal.
wow, didn't he have anything better to do? You know, you could spend the time practicing. That would be good. He's a principal bass in the New York City Ballet. I
Okay.
happened to have worked with his father, who was a drummer. One of my first club dates in New York, like a wedding or something. And then I met Ron later uh, at a wall-to-wall Bach program at Symphony Space.
Hmm.
He sat in with the orchestra. I think he was about 17 or something.
Yeah.
So I've known him a while, but I haven't seen him for a while.
Well, when I was looking at your resumes, et cetera, this thought came into my head that if you haven't written a book, you should. And I have the title. Are you ready? It goes something like this, might have to be edited. John Beal, bassist, Baroque to Bach to Bop, to Bernstein to Big Band to Broadway to Big Bird and Belafonte. I
Well,
couldn't I couldn't fit in Philip Glass. It didn't have the right ring to it.
that's too long a title. You
I
need a
think so.
one-word title.
Well, if you had to put it into one word, could you could you put your career into one or two words?
Um, better than working. Better than working for a living.
Right on. Was there a point when you were young that this career sort of came to be a possibility to you? Did you have what we would now call an epiphany or some like moment that just like put you on this path?
I had encouragement from my first bass teacher, who told me that you'll always make a living playing the bass. So that gives you confidence, when you hear something like that.
Why? Why the bass?
Because that's what I played and that's my focus. And this, I'm talking junior high school or high school. I guess it was high school. And then, I just, you get hooked as soon as you make a couple bucks playing playing something you like. I played
Yeah.
for a kid's dance class on Saturday nights and made $3. And I barely knew the names of the strings, so that was the beginning.
Yeah, you made that's one less than I made on my first gig. I made four.
That's good.
It's a good feeling, isn't it? But when I said, why did he say that about the bass? Do you think the bass is, oh, this was a question for later, but I'm going to try it now. Music has changed the way it's produced so much over the years. And I'm wondering if the bass has been somewhat immune from all the changes in technology.
Well, it's been affected by pickups and the high tech method of recording to a certain extent. I was just listening to couple Chet Baker records recorded in Italy with these bizarre mixes, and sounded like they're just recording the bass through a pickup, and it sounded like a banjo, you know. But the bass has not changed. I have a bass that's 280 years old, one of my basses, and it's got the same, you know, the sound improves year by year by aging. And a contractor called me up recently about a show that they were doing, Jelly's Last Jam, and they were very. The director was very interested in having period piano, period drums, and the contractor asked me, "Is there such thing as a period bass?" I said, "No, they're the same. I mean, all basses are a little different because there's no set model, but a bass is a bass. You know, you look at a modern bass and it looks like an old bass, the same shape, except maybe the varnish or less wear. You know.
When you came up here in 2005 to play with Kenny, and I recall that you didn't want an amplifier. The room was acoustically really wonderful. But do you find that your fellow musicians on a club date or something play differently volume wise when you don't have an amplifier? Are they sympathetic to your bass setup?
It's a great question because I believe that the bass really affects the balance of a band or an orchestra. And one reason I got away from amplifier was because if you use a pickup and you bow, it sounds like a baritone sax, you know. And so you have to get a full tone with no amp, and you get the real sound of the bass. But sometimes you have to use a microphone because of the venue or the size of an orchestra, you know, or the size of the hall you're playing in the theater. But I really got away from the amplified acoustic bass. I went through a whole period where I used to pick up because doing TV shows, live shows, it's just practically necessary if they want to hear the notes, you know, because you're not separated acoustically from drums and all the other louder instruments.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall the first reason you had to play the electric bass?
Yes, because the Beatles came into existence. And at the time, I was doing a lot of club dates, weddings, and bar mitzvahs, and the Beatles hit hard, you know, very popular. And you want to keep getting gigs. So I went out and bought a Hagstrom electric bass, took it on the gig, you know, faked my way through it. And then I decided that maybe I could convert the acoustic bass so it would sound like an electric bass. So I devised a magnetic pickup, and a friend of mine, Dan Armstrong, who was a guitar technician, hooked this thing up. And then pretty soon I realized they wanted to see an electric bass. They don't care about the sound, you know, the public wants to see it.
That's that's really interesting. Um, I
But
guess I
that's
guess
what
that
started
happens
me
a
on
lot.
that's what started me on Fender bass, you know, and then there was a lot of work because especially if you could read music and on electric bass, and they used it on recording because it was so easy to record, you know, TV commercials and whatever, you know.
How does that work in the heyday of the studio scene in New York? Do you get hooked up with a contractor, establish a reputation, and then your phone starts to ring?
It's mostly word of mouth, you know, but you do get hooked up with contractors who can depend on what you do, because a lot of times they'll book something and the requirements aren't fully known. And if you're versatile and they know you can cover a variety of styles and situations, they want to hire you, so they're covered. And I was lucky enough to be called by several different contractors, and I worked for almost everybody. I didn't have any particular affiliation, you know. You
Did
just
you
freelance. You're
did you
out.
typically know did you typically know what you were in for when you showed up at a studio for a date? Did they tell you this is a cigarette commercial or this is a pop recording date for a singer?
No, no, you get called for they give you the time and what instrument. That's it. But a record date, you find out what it is. You get a good idea of what to expect. Like if you're doing an album, if it's a show album or a singer or whatever.
Who were your favorite drummers when you walked into the studio and you hoping to see somebody on drums? Did you have favorites that you worked well with?
Well, I liked a lot of drummers. Uh, I worked with Ronnie Zito many years on the Tony Award show and other studio dates, and played with a lot of great drummers. Gus Johnson, uh, played once with Danny Richmond, Denzel Best, Maury Feld, George White, George Wetling, Cliff Lehman, uh, Connie Kay, just Bill Livornia, another one.
Hmm.
Some
And
I can't even come up with all the names.
yeah, Ronnie Zito's from up here, from Utica,
I
and
know. So is Jimmy Gormworth.
that's correct.
And Jimmy was. I played a lot with Jimmy when I was at Juilliard. We used to jam a lot. There used to be a lot of jamming going on around town. Different nights in Harlem. And used to just move around to play. That's my other life.
It seems to me that bassists have a burden to carry that other, especially horn players, don't. And that is someone calls a tune and you are the foundation. You're the harmonic foundation and the time. And if you don't know the tune, who are you going to depend on to get through it? So, how do you learn tunes? How did you learn the standards so that you were as prepared as possible?
Well, I started out listening, playing along with records. Like one of the first records I played with was Errol Garner, who had a great beat, right? And you could find the bass notes pretty easily. So your ear gets attuned to fitting in what's going on. And a lot of times you'll depend on a piano player, but a lot of times the piano player depends on you. I had to play with Duke Ellington's band one time, and it was a TV show. I remember Joe Benjamin had a fender bender, and I was on the beach at Fire Island. My daughter was about 7. She ran down to the beach and said, "Hey, there's a guy named Mercer on the phone." And so I went in and subbed that night on this TV show. And the point I'm making is Tony Bennett was on one of the artists on the show, and he wanted to do Left My Heart in San Francisco. And Duke was not that familiar with that tune, and he would wait for my bass note and then fill in beautifully. So that's an example. You work as a team, and you're not independent in You know, if a piano player is going to play a substitution, you latch onto it. You know, a
In
lot of
like
times,
one beat, right? You latch onto it within a beat.
yeah, or you can sense where they're going. You know, or maybe the first time around they'll play it, and then the second eight you'll catch it. You know, so you spend your life, uh, I say, faking through everything. You know,
Yeah, but you can't fake through the American Symphony repertoire, and
well, that's a different bag. You know,
so that's sort of my question here. Did you, as a young man, think this thing out as if I'm going to make a living in this business by being able to do absolutely anything? Or did the work just present itself and you learned how to do it as it
that's an interesting question. You know, when I realized that I wasn't going to be playing with Miles, I decided, well, I'll go to Juilliard. I'll learn. At least I'll be playing the bass. I'll learn how to play an orchestra and play the instrument, and so that sort of led me into different areas. And I might add that playing uh, legitimately, so in quotes, you know, symphonically, you have different skills and it gives you a longevity in the music business. Like when you're playing in a rhythm section, rhythm sections are stylized according to what's going on at certain time periods, right? And when they use you up, you know, they go on to the next guy, the next fad or style, and but if you're playing in a string section, there's no end to the need for uh, that ability. You know what I mean? Uh, like Bill Livornia, the drummer, said, "Well, they'd say, get me Bill Livornia." Then he said, then they'd say, "Get me somebody that sounds like Bill Livornia." Then they say, "Who's Bill Livornia?" You know, so
wow.
that's longevity. You know, but if you play legitimately, you'll always be able to work in a string section, no matter how. I mean, I'm 88 and I'm still doing gigs in orchestras.
Mm-hmm. What was it about John Beal, besides your skill as a player, that would keep you high on the contractors list? Do you have a work ethic you can share with me?
You have to play in tune, you have to play in time, you have to show up on time, and you have to play the right style. There's probably more to it, but basically, you got to play in tune, man. You know, if you're in the recording business.
Did you ever have a circumstance where they had to do another take just because of you?
Um, Probably, but I have a friend who was a bass player and a contractor, and he said, never confess. A lot of times, if you make a mistake, it's up to them to hear it. You don't want to confess your mistakes because they might just be going to do another take anyway. You know, and a lot of times they do. So it's just one of those things.
Yes. I once asked Bucky Pizzarelli what kind of date might he have done that would be worth coming home and talking to his wife Ruth about? Hey, guess what occurred today? Do you have one of those, like, with all the work you do, what is worth bringing up when you get home?
Oh, I always comment about what I just did. Like I played a Dixieland gig Sunday night, and I came home and told my wife that was like a lot of fun. Like I really love playing that bass. I got the sound that I wanted to get. Don't play with any microphone or amplifier, and the place was sold out to a tour of Japanese tourists, older people, and they ended up like really getting into it. There's dancing and throwing up their hands, and during the break they'd run up on the bandstand and pose with pictures, put their arms around you. This is really a lot of fun. So I just described that,
Nice.
and I described like my impressions of different jobs. Bucky is a great friend of mine from way back, and I love playing with him. In fact, we played on a Ruby Braff album, a couple of them, and we're just compatible.
That's a interesting concept about. I used to think that almost all veteran jazz people all got along. Um,
I
that
agree.
yeah, you think that's true then?
I agree. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're all in the same love situation. Like music, like jazz. I mean, jazz has been my first preference, but I like playing symphonic stuff. I played with Leopold Stokowski, and that was a lot of fun. His last 3 years in this country, and I was fortunate enough to get principal bass in his orchestra, and you'd always end up sweating with him. Even if you're hungover, you go into a rehearsal, and in about a half hour you're sweating. You know, he'd really make you play.
Do you think modern classical music is, I'm not sure where modern starts, but um, more difficult to play than the classics, the Romantic period, and Baroque music? That's a wide question, but I once had an experience playing a Honegger piece, and there was a saxophone part. And man, I could not keep track of where it was. It was so harmonically dense. And of course, they had 60 bars of rest before I came in. And I talk about sweating. Please give
Yeah,
me a cue.
yeah. Well, you're getting into a controversial area. There was a book called now I can't remember. Damn. The Agony of Modern Music by Henry Pleasant. And he said the real modern music is jazz. And because like from Stravinsky on, that it got so complicated with different time signatures. And it's like a made up idiom sort of, because uh, the complexity of playing contemporary music, it's like you don't know a style. I mean, you have to learn the style of each individual composer, but it's like complicated. It's a specific skill you have to. Uh, I I don't want to go
It's
further.
it seems like the music composition in the classical world keeps trying to do something new. And I think it might have to do with getting a grant, getting grants to write new work, and how far can you go and still do something new? And what we get is what maybe you're struggling to find in your description.
Well, I have my own opinion about some of that stuff. But you know, a lot of guys specialize in it, and they're happy doing that. Um, I have an example. There was a series called Music from Japan, and they used to display the scores in the lobby, you know, under glass. And that's like, and Henry Pleasant's in this book, he mentions like composers, they have to get a teaching job so they can explain their music, you know. And it's got to explain the music, man.
You didn't have to explain that Dixieland music, did you?
No, 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 not to the Japanese people. Funny thing is, the host of this thing the other night was saying the leader asked her to translate what he was saying, and he says, "We're going to play a tune from a place in Chicago called the Royal Garden. It's the Royal Garden Blues." And so she said, "They're going to play Royal Garden Brews." So it's like about beer, you know?
Lost in translation.
Yeah,
So you were a young man with when you went with Woody Herman, and
yeah.
yeah, I wondered mid, let's see, mid 50s.
55, I got the gig. Yeah, I was there for about a year, and then he broke the band up.
Hmm.
Uh,
Were you sorry the band broke up? Were you enjoying it?
oh, yeah. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Nat Pierce was there, Richard Kamuka, you know, it was a lot of fun. All mostly one nighters for a year. I think I was 19, yeah, 19 when I got in that band.
That's good. That's a young man's game doing that.
Yeah, and I still playing on the same instrument.
Oh
I mean,
my.
I play on different instruments, but I haven't been playing that bass for 70 years, and it's best it's ever sounded right now.
How did the band get around at that time? Did you have a
Car,
luxurious bus?
well, no, it was cars, and we got paid an extra $25 for driving. So, and then there was a couple wrecks, you know, and then they got a bus, and it's a kind of broken down bus. To go in a reverse, the driver had to go out and stick a broom handle into the transmission. I remember we played at Newport Jazz Festival once, and the bus had broken down, so they had to get a school bus. We showed up in Newport in a school bus.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Woody Herman Orchestra. Here they come in the yellow bus.
Yeah, but it was a swinging band, you know. It's a lot of fun.
Can you define swing? What a
Uh,
question, eh?
can I define swing? Swing is when everything's clicking and it's intense and it feels good. What can I say? Everybody's on the same plane.
Exactly. And I think it has something to do as well as like the volume balance between the rhythm section instruments. Because when you think about Basie's classic rhythm section, it sounds like one instrument almost. Everything is just so in sync.
Yeah, it's all about the beat, man. And all music is about the beat. And a conductor that has the beat is usually a good conductor, you know, and he doesn't even have to read music. If he's got a beat, he can survive. I've worked with conductors like that.
Wow. You mean that they didn't really weren't reading the score? They were,
Right.
yeah.
The ear, you know, and the ear determines pitch too. It's not just pressing the buttons. You know, you just, but the beat is primary.
Did you have a moment in a studio date where you started to see the technology enter the picture, either with replacing people or different ways of, overdubbing and all that? Do you recall when that started to creep into the scene?
Yeah, when I started, there was not so much tracking, multiple tracking. So you got to play it right the first time, or every time. And then when the multiple tracking came in and punching in tracks, like guys wouldn't have the pressure to play correctly, the first time. You know what I mean? Because they knew that they could redo a mistake. That had an influence, I believe. And also, when the mix ended up being with the engineer, like I remember with Woody's band, we played in Madison, Wisconsin, and a doctor had a stereo Ampex machine. He wanted to record the band. He had two mics, Telefunken, put one in front of the band and one in front of the rhythm section. And that's like a natural balance. Now, when the multiple track recording came in, they mix it later to the taste of the engineer, And I noticed sometimes an engineer will not even come out and listen to the sound in the studio, the natural sound of the bass. And it became very technical.
That's a very interesting take on the effect on the musicians being less demanding about their own performance.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But, it came more specialized. The guy can go in and try something 10 times if he has to.
Yes, and then of course the engineer and the producer can take those 10 tracks and they can create a new one. That's a favorite thing, like take a piece, first four bars from this one.
Yeah, I hear it on records. This one record played on with Gene Rowland arrangements. It was Jimmy Knepper's album, but Alan Zoot were on it, and Clark Terry, Snooky Young, and it's swinging. Called "Swinging Friends" was the name of the record, and sometimes, well, in particular, I the last chorus like a totally different tempo because of a splice, bad splice because of an ensemble problem. Maybe it wasn't clean, so they just like spliced in the last chorus at a totally different tempo from another take. And you can hear it a lot of times on records.
Mm-hmm.
And a friend of mine said, who played in the Los Angeles Philharmonic, said this one conductor I won't name was conducting a Stravinsky piece, and he conducted a mistake that was in a recording. You could tell that he learned the piece from a recording that had a mistake in it. Bad splice.
Interesting. Years ago, I was able to sit in the orchestra pit of a production of Cats. And I was watching, this was like a touring group. I was watching the guys on the synthesizers, and they'd play their part, and then they'd pick up a magazine, and they would read and read. Then they put the magazine down and play their part. And I started to wonder, when you play a Broadway show for a length of time, sometimes years, how do you keep your focus? how do you not zone out and miss your cue?
Well, it, it's you're on automatic pilot, I mean, that's Broadway. Repeating 8 shows a week if you do 8 shows. But like I played Phantom of the Opera for 11 and a half years. But the contract on Broadway in New York, you may send a sub for 50% of the shows. So I was able to work normal freelance stuff as well as the show. But you know where you are in the show, and some people would memorize their parts. I've never been able to separate that process. I always would read the part, but the depends on the quality of musicians in the result of the performance. And I feel that 50% rule made much better orchestras on Broadway because you get better players that are doing other things. And before that, you'd be at the mercy of the conductor or contractor if you wanted to take off. They didn't have to let you off, so they'd get guys that the only thing they did was a show, grind it out.
Was that a musicians union uh, negotiation to get that 50% subbing bit in there?
Uh, I don't know how that happened, but it was a great thing. And I know one conductor that I worked for, Paul Gimignani, he always hired a band because he wanted who he wanted. He wanted good players. And he just said, well, just take care of the chair, make sure it's covered if you want to take off. So that was like really the beginning of that concept. And I was amazed when they actually put it in their contract.
So you,
And later on, certain conductors wanted to tighten it up and, make it less liberal.
I see. But you must have a list then of possible subs. First person I call, second person I call.
Well, you just want to get somebody that can cover it, and take care of business. And I got a letter from one contractor. He says, I don't care how many times you take off, but you got to reduce the number of subs on the list from 18. I had 18 different subs. And the letter of the contract says you can have 5. But there's always a loophole, you can take one off the list and put somebody else on, But I haven't been involved in that too much lately. So, but now it's pretty, Broadway is the most desirable field of work in New York. It's the best paying jobs because the studio stuff is way down. So
If you had, I'm going to ask you to think back. In 1974, I'm going back from 2024. What kind of advice might you have given to someone coming up as opposed to the advice you would give them now? Can we talk about what you would have said to a 19-year-old musician in 1974 trying to find a place in the business?
I guess just play. I'll quote Mose Allison. He said, "Play every time, every chance you get. Play every chance you get." Now there's not as many opportunities. There's plenty of musicians around, but the opportunities are limited. All the little gigs, don't pay very much. It's hard to make a living at this time.
It's frustrating to think why has this occurred? I guess there's a number of reasons why some of those gigs have gone away. DJs, etc.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I made a living playing club dates for 7 years when I first got married, and now they don't have the same. There's no market, you know. That's a lot of mostly DJs, I think, that doing that kind of work. There are some bands working at that, but I don't know. I've been away from that for so long,
Mm-hmm.
but it was you know, and I must say that doing that kind of work, you really learn a lot. You know, you learn how to fake through tunes, and you know, they used to have bands that faked everything. You know, pretty big size, like a sax section faking harmonies, and you know, pretty skillful players.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that. Like the band leader would say, "Misty, hold up three fingers" or whatever, and then as Misty
Yeah.
was coming to an end, they'd call another tune, two flats.
Oh yeah. The hand signals, sure. And you guys would fake harmonies, and you know, there's a certain pool of musicians that were excellent at
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, I'm going to run a few names by you and see if you have any recollections or comments about them. I'm going to start with Nina Simone.
Nina Simone, my comment is that I was with Woody's band at Atlantic City playing at the Steel Pier, and we had a night off. And I went into a bar, and there was this woman playing and singing, and it really sounded great. And I asked the bartender, "Who is that?" He says, "Nina Simone, but her real name is Eunice Brown." And I went up there to speak with her, and I said, "Eunice." And she said, "Who told you that?" Because she was using Nina. And then many years later, I got to play on a record that she was, you know, in the string section of a record called Baltimore. Dave Matthews did the charts of that. Good string section. And I was friends with Al Shackman, who was her MD. I played with him in other situations.
How about Philip Glass?
Philip Glass was in Juilliard when I was there, and he liked to jam. He had a house in Chinatown that he paid $65 a month rent. It was like a pretty frame house, ramshackle, you know. And we'd play down there once in a while. I had a motorcycle. I went down with the bass on the motorcycle, and we played down there. And then later on, you know what happened with him? He got very big. I played a couple film scores with him, and I played some incidental music for a Beckett play that he wrote for timpani and double bass. And Beckett had instructed that there be no music on for this play. I forget the name of the play, but so he wrote timpani and bass. I guess that's not music. But I talk about technology and recording. You know, his style is repetitive phrases, repetitive with slight variations. So recording is like really tough, and you'd have to go back and punch in, and the repetitions. It's very hard to keep track of that stuff. You know.
Yeah. Okay, play this measure 80 times.
Well, I'm not 80, but maybe 4 times, maybe 4 bars 4 times, and then 8 bars 6 times. You know, with like slight differences. You know, but you know, very popular style.
I was watching a video, his music, I can't pronounce this. Koyanis Katsi, Koyanisqatsi. I think you might have played on that. Sound familiar?
No,
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. I think it's pretty standard with you fellas that to say, "Oh, you played on that. Don't you remember?" I remember Bucky did that a number of times.
You remember some things, but I swear to God, like some commercials, jingles. You go in for 1 hour and you don't even remember what it was, and you get residual checks for years, thousands of dollars perhaps, and you don't even remember what the product was. It's funny.
And is the reverse of that true? Do you and Cynthia try to keep track of things like, what happened with that Paul Simon date? Did I ever get paid for that? Or don't you have to do that?
Well, you keep track of you're sure when you don't get paid, you keep track of that.
Yeah.
But like when you're doing a lot of jingles and every 13 weeks is a payment if they keep running it. So it would add up. And the great thing about it was the pension contributions, 10% on residuals as well as the actual date. So it's a great feature. Thanks to the union.
Can you name a commercial that, for one reason or another, stuck in your head that you played on?
Well, a lot of early McDonald's commercials, and like uh, Nationwide is on your side. Aren't you glad you used Dial? Um, it's a lot of orchestra stuff that you don't remember particularly. But it's fun to do them. You go and do it fast, and because they don't want to go overtime. It's just an hour, and we're doing a public domain commercial of a Rossini opera. 30-second jingle, and so somebody would say, "That's a great length for an opera, 30 seconds."
I'm going to use that, John. How about, do you remember playing on Jamaica Farewell?
What's that, Belafonte?
Yeah,
No,
yeah, Belafonte.
I remember doing a recording with him.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure how much I should trust all this, but what about playing for Big Bird?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I went to school. I took some college in Washington D.C., my hometown, and Jerry Nelson was in the same class, and he was Big Bird. He ended up being Big Bird. So small world. And he also lived in my neighborhood in New York. Ran into him, but I don't remember the music. I remember one thing on a Muppet movie. Uh, who was uh, the arranger? 88 years old in my memory. But the Kermit the Frog was doing a jazz waltz, and bass player, the electric bass player, had just gotten a new bass with 6-string bass, and so he was improvising a bass part. And he started playing on the low string, like low B's, and it sounded like Wagner. But it was like the frog singing like a little light jazz waltz. It's
Yep.
funny.
I always wanted to work on the Muppet Show. I thought that was just brilliant um, throughout.
Yeah, the guys in that band, it was a nice, really nice job.
I think that was Bob Cranshaw on a lot of that.
Yeah, Cranshaw was the gig. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was his gig. Nice. I subbed for Cranshaw with Jimmy Rolls a lot too down Bradley's. That was a lot of fun.
He's very respected.
Bob was great. Yeah, great guy.
Here's a question about um, over the years, I'm sure you've played with people in different situations who were not readers, who were self taught, oftentimes guitar players. I wonder if you almost surprisingly learned anything from those self taught musicians.
Well, the first one I played, I learned from was Errol Garner on his records. He was self-taught. He couldn't read music. And years later, Woody Herman made a record, a duet record with him. And we were playing at Basin Street, and they were promoting that record, and they invited Errol to come and play with the band. And it was like a 3-tune medley that modulated. And he sat in and played. He couldn't read the chart at all, but he just played it by ear. So as far as people who couldn't read, how about a guy like Eddie Deal, guitar player, great player? I don't think he could read. I mean, reading is overrated.
I concur, and I've learned from some of the guitar players, especially that their ears are so tuned in because they learned that way, and they sometimes think of things compositionally that schooled musicians may not because it doesn't follow certain chord patterns, etc. They're not concerned with that. They're concerned with if it sounds good, then it is good.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go along with that. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll play with a younger player that might not know the tune. He goes on his phone and looks it up, and he's playing from his phone. And I always like, I don't get it. Like for instance, like Mingus, the way he rehearsed the band, they didn't have music. It, they'd make up, he'd sing the parts, or they'd rehearse, they'd develop it without music. And you could do that with a small group.
This is almost an aside, but I watched an interview with you. I think it was fairly recent. It was another young man there. And somehow this bit about fixed dough and movable dough came up. And I have
Yeah.
to say, I'd never heard of such a thing until my own daughter brought it up, who's a music teacher, and it was something about Eastman School of Music. And I said, what are you talking about?
Well, oh Christ. It's a solfeggio. It's like fixed do would be C is do. And so do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, right? In the key of C. But movable, it would be, do would be the fundamental of the key you're in. Like E flat would be do. So I don't know. I was never good at that. Jonathan Tunick, this classmate of mine, used to say, I used to put on my shades and read the New York Post in the solfeggio class, which I don't remember. But, you know, conductors, like there was a conductor at Juilliard, Jean Morel, great conductor, but very French and disciplined. And he used solfeggio, and he would sing something in fixed do. One time, Shostakovich was visiting orchestra rehearsal, and I don't know if that was one, but anyhow, some big wigs were at the rehearsal, and he was trying to explain how the flute part had a pickup to a certain letter Q, and the note was F, fa. fa, and he would say, he'd say, fa Q. In other words, the pickup was set to the letter Q. He'd say, fuck you, in front of all these people. It was funny, man.
Oh, you can't make that things up.
No, I didn't make it up. It happened.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's like a Bill Crow story. Um, how about Leonard Bernstein?
How about him?
How
Yeah,
about him?
yeah. Really, he had the beat, man. He had a great pulse. And he didn't have to convey it. It was just there, you know. It was there. And played a couple things with him. I played on a mass that he wrote, recording. I played actually Fender bass on that. And there's a ballet piece he wrote called Dubek that I played on. And we did Symphony of Psalms at Carnegie Hall one time that he conducted. Really memorable, to me.
What kind of date or an event tends to make you anxious or nervous? Is there anything that makes you apprehensive about it?
Well, you're always apprehensive playing a symphony concert, especially if you don't trust the conductor. You know, that makes you apprehensive. Um,
What wouldn't you trust about a conductor? For cues, or is it more than that?
no, I know one conductor who gives you a cue after you play, but
In other words, he heard it and go, "Oh yes, thank you for
yeah,
coming
yeah,
in."
yeah. I mean, that's being a little facetious, But what I wouldn't trust about a conductor is if the conductor doesn't have the beat, man. If he doesn't have a good beat, it's then you have to take fill in the difference. A lot of orchestras are able to do that. They play together, self-preservation, and mentioning Broadway, some of these conductors were rehearsal piano players, and they learn the music and they get to conduct it, and you know you
Enough
can't
said.
follow, you shouldn't follow them, and if a sub comes in and follows them, he's wrong because he's not with the band, because the band knows better than to follow the conductor. I don't want to get negative, man.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, and I've also, along the technology lines, I've heard drummers talk about playing a Broadway show from another room,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah. My friend Warren Oates, he was in another room. He's playing Shrek. You don't even know who you're playing with, you know. And if you don't have the mix in your phones, you can be way off because you're looking at the conductor. I had that happen to me.
It's sort of like that thing, we can do this, but should we? So, last question, John. When did you know that you had the beat? Because you've talked about the beat a lot today. And was it something you think you were born with, or was it early exposure with
Look,
records?
the beat is an opinion, It's an opinion where you put it, and you try to adjust to what's happening if you have to, but you have to stand your ground to a certain extent. You know what I mean? It's like it's not infallible. So I don't know. I just try to keep time, and try not to drag or rush. You know what Al Cohen said: no, Carl Fontana said to Al Cohen, I played with his drummer last night. Every time he played with sticks, he rushed, and every time he played with brushes, he dragged. And Al says, well, couldn't he play with one of each? I like that one.
I do too. Um, I like drummers. Some drummers like to play with the time more than others. Not play the time, play with the time. And if you're with somebody like that, do you like dig in and say, all right, if you have to play with the time, then I'm gonna play the time for you to
What do
mess
you
with?
mean play with the time? You mean like move it around,
Yeah, moving and
move the tempo?
it's
Why would they do that?
because I think it's the progression of the instrument or what maybe it goes under the big umbrella of freedom. I don't want to be tied to just being a timekeeper. I want to be experimental. I want to express myself.
Well, then you have to conform to that. You know, I mean, if that's what you're going for, you have to go for that. You have to go for whatever it is. You know, you always have to go for it, not just be rigid. You know, that's why you change styles and you try to get the best result from what you're going for. That's all.
All right. Well, that's a good way to wrap this up. What's your next gig? You had a Dixieland thing. What's the next thing for you?
Well, I just got a call. I mean, an email that, for this job. It's in Madison Square Garden. It's three concerts with American Symphony, and let's see if I could. Joe Hisaishi music from the Studio Ghibli films. It's anime, and this guy is a composer and conductor and a pianist, very good. And it's a lot of fun to do. Did one a few years ago in Carnegie Hall. And this is three concerts in Madison Square Garden in July the what is it the, the 11th, 12th, and 13th, and that's like 16,000 people in that place, and so we'll be honking it out there. You know, I mean, it's good music. It really is fun. Last time I played there was with the Who. Played there in Jones Beach. Got a chance to play with the Who. That was great.
How do they amplify? Were you playing upright bass?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How do they amplify it for some venue like that?
Well, that when they put a pickup on a bass, which I wasn't happy about, but this particular one, they'll use microphones. Microphone gets more or less accurate sound.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, look, let's face it, you know, recordings. I want to say that all Duke Ellington's recordings, you can really hear the bass on every one going all the way back. You know, he made sure the bass was not buried.
I remember a story from Norman Simmons talking about hearing Duke's music and the bass coming through those big Zenith speakers. And he went like this, and it obviously made an impression on him.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to remember uh, the bass player with Brubeck, Eugene Wright.
Eugene Wright. Mm-hmm.
So an interview with him, and he said when he was 13 years old, he went to hear Basie's band, and he could hear Walter Page. He would be up in the balcony, and he could hear Walter Page cut through the band, you know. And you know that says a lot.
It does.
Acoustic bass can be heard.
And there's a percussiveness to it that I think serves well when you're in a trio, like without a drummer. the bass becomes the percussion as well.
Yeah, I don't get to play with too many drummers anymore. I play a lot of sessions with guitar players and horn players, but and I've been using gut strings the last few years. I started on gut, I'm ending up on gut, having a second childhood. Really into it.
Well, you've come a long way since the $3 dance class gigs.
Yeah.
And I want
And
to thank you.
now I'm doing $50 Dixieland gigs.
But you're still having a blast.
Yeah, I must say.
All right.
Looking
Thanks a lot,
forward to it.
John. It's a pleasure hooking up with you again, and I hope to see you in person at some point.
Yeah, well, maybe you never know.
Never
In
know.
fact, I think I have a DVD of us in Hamilton College. You sat in on clarinet,
Soprano sax.
soprano. Yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
looked at. I never had a player, so I never saw it. But I,
Okay.
I remember the gig. Tony DiNicola,
Yep.
James Cirillo,
Yep. And
and
Kenny.
Kenny Barone. Yeah.
Kenny was
So
one of a kind.
I'll say I miss him.
Yeah.
We miss him. A lot of people miss Kenny. Yeah. All right,
All
man.
right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. A lot of